What if I told you the very people once hidden from the world's gaze were, in ancient times, seen as whispers of the divine? What if love, not ignorance, greeted their first breath even before science had a name for them? Tonight, we unravel the quiet, extraordinary history of people born with Down syndrome, a story that has lived in shadows yet never ceased to shine. Hey, you, before we journey into the forgotten past, take a moment to hit that follow or subscribe button if this kind of deep human storytelling resonates with you. And in the comments, let us know where you're watching from and what hour it is in your part of the world. Now, go ahead, dim the lights, maybe turn on a quiet fan to hum alongside this story, and let's begin. Long before there were clinics, diagnoses, or chromosomes with extra copies, there were just eyes-curious, puzzled, sometimes kind, sometimes afraid, trying to make sense of the different among us. In those ancient days, when myths explained more than medicine, the birth of a child who looked or acted differently wasn't processed through a chart. It was met with superstition, or something surprisingly tender. Fast forward to 2014, in the French countryside, where a team of archaeologists unearthed a 1,500-year-old burial site. Among the bones and dust of history, they found a child, small, fragile, but very telling. The skull bore distinct features recognizable today as consistent with Down syndrome. But here's what made it unforgettable. This child hadn't been discarded. No evidence of exile, no unmarked grave. They were buried with care, in the same ritualistic manner as others in their community. Reverently, purposefully. That discovery sent a message through time, a whisper wrapped in soil. This child mattered. In a world without words like syndrome or chromosome 21, maybe that child was simply known as gentle, carried more often, spoken to more softly. Perhaps their presence in the village wasn't a problem, but presents a quieter rhythm in the family song. It's a rare find, but it's not the only one. Traces of people with Down syndrome have been discovered in ancient Rome, highland burial sites in the Andes, and even early European graves. And they weren't tossed away, they were buried with the others, within the fold. These ancient echoes remind us that people born with Down syndrome have always walked among us, not as mistakes, but as part of humanity's full expression. Their presence isn't modern, it's not new. It's as old as fire, as essential as breath. They are a strand in the original human thread woven in from the very beginning. It's a truth history didn't always record with kindness, but it's one we can still feel if we listen. If we look closely at these ancient burials, they seem to whisper across the centuries. I lived. I was held. I belonged. Now, as we move deeper into time, into the ancient cities and sacred texts of Greece, Rome, Egypt, and India, we find a world brimming with meaning, yet grasping in the dark for explanation. These were civilizations rich in poetry and superstition, in gods and omens, where difference wasn't studied, it was interpreted. Back then, physical or cognitive differences weren't labeled, they were symbolized. A child born with soft features and a gentle spirit might be seen as a divine touch, an omen, or a living prophecy. In many places, they were welcomed as spiritually unique messengers from the gods, bridges to the unseen. In others, sadly, the response tilted toward fear, suspicion, even rejection. Without genetics to explain anything, myth filled the gap. And myth is a wild creature. It can heal, or it can harm. In some places, like in early Hindu writings, children born with distinct traits were seen through the lens of reincarnation, returning souls with cosmic purpose, born to teach or complete karmic journeys. That didn't always translate into a life of dignity, but it did mean the soul was seen as sacred. Meanwhile, Egyptian and Greco-Roman myths tell of children born beneath strange star souls, marked by divine will. There's no clear mention of what we now know as Down syndrome, but their worldview made room for transformation, for mystery. Sometimes these children were kept close, other times pushed to the edges. It all depended on the culture, the century, and perhaps most of all the heart of whoever held them first. Some villages, we imagine, kept their children with Down syndrome near the hearth, in the middle of home life. Their slowness didn't subtract, it became a new pace for the family to breathe by. Others, driven by shame or fear, locked their stories behind closed doors. But across the ancient world, one thing is clear. The response to difference was never one size fits all. These children were not seen as broken. They were seen as something else. Sometimes revered, sometimes feared, but always, always interpreted. As we move toward the long shadows of the medieval age, superstition tightens its grip. This era between empires and enlightenment would cast a different kind of silence over people born different. But even there, in the centuries when fear wore across and science was still a heresy, something stubborn remained. The quiet, enduring presence of those who simply war.and, the rare, powerful love of those who saw them not as omens, but as kin. And that's where our journey continues next. They were tucked away behind iron doors, out of sight, out of mind, entire lives boxed into uniforms and silence. And all the while, the world called it care. But what if the real danger wasn't the disability, but the system pretending to help? In the mid-20th century, sprawling institutions became the default destination for individuals with Down syndrome. These weren't places of nurture, they were warehouses of sameness, where routine crushed individuality. Whether a child named Eli with a laugh like a flute, or Maya who hugged every nurse twice, all were flattened into a single, silent category: unfit. Personal growth? That was never part of the blueprint. Most residents followed military-style schedules, wore the same scratchy uniforms, and had little say in anything. To the outside world, it seemed progressive, a clean solution to the problem of difference. Parents, often told by doctors and social workers that they were doing the merciful thing, believed these places offered protection from a society still too cruel to accept their child. But for the children themselves, these walls were more than stone. They were emotional exile, cut off from their communities, their families, and often their very identities. Behind institutional walls, their stories faded, not because they lacked stories, but because no one thought they were worth telling. And the world played along. If people with Down syndrome were hidden away, then society never had to change. No one asked schools to adapt. No one demanded workplaces make room. The myth that these children couldn't learn, couldn't grow, couldn't contribute continued to spread like a fog, and no one questioned it. Not entirely, though. In some rare institutions, people like Mrs. Bramley, an elderly nurse with hands like folded bread dough, saw the residents as people, not problems. She sang lullabies during mealtimes, taught them their names when no one else bothered to use them. A few children bonded like siblings, forming unbreakable friendships. But these moments were flickers, not flames, brief kindnesses in a cold design. The hardest truth? So many brilliant, kind, capable individuals spent entire lives behind locked doors, not because they were dangerous, but because the world wasn't ready to see them. But history never stays still. This chapter of silence and systemic failure was also the tension coil before the spring, because eventually the hidden would begin to step into the light, and when they did, they weren't alone. They were joined by mothers, fathers, allies, and eventually their own voices. And just when society might have learned compassion, a darker chapter began. Under the guise of scientific improvement, humanity would again lose its way. Enter eugenics. The early 20th century saw the rise of an ideology as chilling as it was widespread: the idea that the human race could be perfected by controlling who was allowed to be born. This wasn't the fantasy of a few fringe philosophers. It was endorsed by governments, doctors, and universities in countries we call progressive today. In places like the US, Canada, Sweden, and the UK, people with Down syndrome were branded as defective, a drain on the system, a deviation to be corrected or prevented altogether. And so came the sterilizations. Thousands of young men and women, many named, many forgotten, were forced into procedures they never consented to. Often, they were never even told what was being done. Their basic rights to family, to love, to choice were erased, inked out by forms stamped with the cold approval of state guardianship. But no regime weaponized eugenics more viciously than Nazi Germany. Under Hitler, the so-called T4 program was launched not in secret but as policy. Its goal? To exterminate individuals deemed life unworthy of life. That included thousands with Down syndrome, often children. It began with letters, innocent-seeming forms, asking parents to send their disabled children to special clinics for better care. Many families, desperate for help, complied, but those children were never seen again. The headquarters was a quiet Berlin address, Tiergartenstrasse 4T4. From there, bureaucrats, doctors, and nurses orchestrated a campaign of mass murder disguised as medicine. Children with Down syndrome, visibly different and thus easiest to target, were among the first taken. Some were starved, others poisoned. Many studied like insects before being euthanized. Their deaths were sanitized, recorded as pneumonia or organ failure. Their families received forged death certificates, their names erased from history's roster. By 1941, public outrage forced the official halt of the T4 program, but the killing never truly stopped. It continued in the shadows for years. Over 70,000 people were murdered by official count, but the true number may never be known. These weren't soldiers, they weren't rebels, they were children who liked shiny things and soft blankets, teens who painted with their fingers, adults who loved humming to themselves. And they were killed because their lives were inconvenient. What happened in Germany wasn't just a Nazi atrocity, it was a human failure. Enabled by silence, justified by science without soul, driven by a belief that some lives matter more than others. But even in that darkness, some dared to whisper no. Nurses hid children. Parents lied on forms. Clergy smuggled lives out of clinics. Quiet acts of rebellion that became seeds of a resistance that would, years later, bloom. After World War II, as the world reeled from its own reflection, the reckoning began. First in horror, then in resolve. People everywhere, governments, survivors, everyday citizens began to ask, what happens when we forget the humanity of a group? And in time, that question spread to include people with disabilities. Parents who had once been silenced began to speak. They gathered, first in living rooms, then in town halls. In the U.S., movements like the ARC took root, formed not by politicians but by mothers and fathers, tired of being told their child's life was a tragedy. They demanded education, medical rights, inclusion, and they weren't alone. Across the UK, Scandinavia, and Australia, similar waves began to form. Advocacy newsletters circulated, conferences were held, training programs for teachers emerged. A language of solidarity began to grow. And most powerfully of all, individuals with Down syndrome began to speak for themselves. This wasn't just a movement, it was a rising. By the 1960s and 70s, something truly revolutionary happened. The people who had always been talked about started talking back, and their voices, gentle, joyful, determined, cut through decades of silence. In America, public schools finally opened their doors. The 1975 Education for All Handicapped Children Act became law, guaranteeing every child, not just some, a right to education. For many with Down syndrome, this was the first time they ever sat at a desk beside a peer. Classrooms changed, so did hearts. Teachers who once believed the myths were stunned to find themselves laughing with students, learning from them, watching them perform in school plays, attend dances, and share their dreams. And the world noticed. Documentaries like A World Apart aired, showing the daily life of a young woman with Down syndrome in the UK. It wasn't sensational. It was human. It was real. And for many viewers, it was the first time they had seen someone like her portrayed with dignity. Families shared their lives, memoirs, photos, essays that pulled no punches but radiated love. And the self-advocates? They rose. They took stages, attended conferences, and said the thing the world needed to hear most. We are not broken. We are not less. We are here and we have something to say. This was the beginning of visibility, not as statistics, not as burdens, but as human beings with voices, dreams, and boundless worth. And in the 1980s and 1990s, those voices got louder. smarter, braver. The system wasn't just being challenged, it was being rewritten. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving. And suddenly, society had to ask the question it had never seriously considered before. What does adulthood look like for someone with Down syndrome? Can they hold jobs, build homes, fall in love? The answer, increasingly and resoundingly, became yes. Absolutely yes. Supportive employment programs began popping up across cities, programs that matched adults with Down syndrome to real jobs in real spaces, local bakeries, libraries, office desks, and even startups founded by self-advocates themselves. These weren't charity gigs. These were roles of purpose, productivity, and pride. At the same time, new living models emerged, housing co-ops and group homes designed to provide semi-independence, safety, and dignity all at once. And then came the stories, quiet, heart-splittingly human stories. Two co-workers with Down syndrome who met over coffee breaks and ended up planning a wedding. Childhood friends who moved in together and figured out rent, groceries, and laundry like anyone else. For decades, society had told these individuals what they couldn't do. Now, they were writing the script themselves and casting themselves in the lead. By the early 2000s, something had shifted. Something radiant. People with Down syndrome, once hidden behind the walls of silence and institutional shadow, stepped forward into the spotlight. And not for sympathy, not for spectacle. They stepped forward for the same reason anyone else does: to be seen, heard, and recognized for who they are. This was no longer limited to academic reports or advocacy brochures. People with Down syndrome began showing up in places we never expected: commercials, fashion runways, television dramas, and center stage performances. And when they did, it wasn't as inspiration porn or side characters. It was real, joyful, bold, unapologetically human. In 2009, the world met Malene Stewart, a radiant force from Australia, who became one of the world's first professional models with Down syndrome. Her photos weren't just stunning, they exploded long-held myths of who belonged in fashion. Her walk graced runways in New York, Paris, and London. And with each step, she redefined the industry's warped definition of beauty. In Spain, Pablo Pineda changed another narrative. He became the first European person with Down syndrome to earn a university degree. Pablo didn't just graduate, he taught, he lectured. He became a global voice for intellectual inclusion and showed that thoughtfulness has never required a typical chromosome count. Television also started catching up. In the US, actor Lauren Potter became a breakout star on the hit series Glee. She wasn't a token, she was talent. Through her performance and advocacy, she helped usher in a generation where kids with Down syndrome could finally see themselves reflected on screen, not as problems, but as protagonists. But this wasn't just about fame and headlines. It was about everyday brilliance. People with Down syndrome were working front desks, slicing bread at bakeries, moving into apartments, planning birthday parties with neighbors. It was about representation, about holding a mirror to their own lives and letting the world finally hold up a window. Representation wasn't just powerful, it was personal. It allowed individuals to see possibility, and it helped society drop the tired, dusty myths. Humor, love, frustration, passion. All were finally being acknowledged as part of their humanity. From invisible to visible, from underestimated to embraced. The spotlight had arrived, but the stage wasn't fully built just yet. Because even with all this progress, the journey toward true inclusion has never been a straight path. It is, today, still paved with contradictions. Yes, we've celebrated major wins, but side by side with uncomfortable realities. In many parts of the world, progress is real but uneven. Support systems vary, acceptance varies. And too often, societal pressure still whispers that certain lives are more manageable than others. Nowhere is this more painfully clear than in the realm of prenatal screening. Today, thanks to medical advances, expectant parents can learn early if their unborn child may have Down syndrome. This knowledge, while empowering to some, can also come with overwhelming fear, especially in cultures where disability is still misunderstood. stigmatized, or viewed as a burden. In several countries, termination rates following a Down syndrome diagnosis are over 90%. That's not a statistic. That's a mirror, and the reflection isn't easy to look at. Are these decisions truly free? Or are they shaped by a society that still equates worth with normalcy? Too many parents report being told the diagnosis like a tragedy, handed a sheet full of risks, but no stories of joy, no photos of graduation, no examples of love. Very few are ever introduced to thriving adults living full, meaningful lives with Down syndrome. In that silence, fear grows. And where fear grows, exclusion is justified. Let's be clear, this is not about shame or condemnation. It's about context, about support, about the need for a culture that paints the full picture, not just the challenges, but the astonishing, ordinary magic of lives that don't follow the script. Because even today, full inclusion remains a struggle. In education, in employment, in relationships, the barriers persist, sometimes visible, sometimes subtle. Some children with Down syndrome are still treated with lowered expectations. Some adults are kept on the sidelines of housing, careers, and friendship. Some systems still don't bend, they break people instead. And yes, while we celebrate the successes of a few TV stars, college graduates, fashion icons, it's important to remember the many who remain unseen. Representation is growing, but if it becomes novelty instead of normality, we lose the point. We tokenize rather than include. Still, the movement marches forward. It grows louder, braver, more unrelenting. And most beautifully, people with Down syndrome are leading the charge. They are no longer being spoken for, they are speaking, writing, teaching, voting, and demanding more than just a seat at the table. They are demanding tables that were always theirs to begin with. Because the end goal isn't awareness. It isn't even representation. It's belonging. A world where no one needs to be explained. Where lives aren't seen as deviations from the norm, but as part of the divine, dazzling diversity of human experience. When we look back through the centuries of exclusion, silence, and slow awakening, one truth echoes louder than all the others. Every life has meaning. Not because it performs, not because it conforms, but because it exists. That truth has been whispered across history, from the careful burials of ancient children with Down syndrome, to the monastery walls where kindness quietly bloomed, to the red carpets, lecture halls, and bakery counters of today. They have always been here, living, loving, teaching, enduring. Their strength has often been quiet, but make no mistake, it has reshaped the world. And no, their lives are not flawless. They're not symbols of purity or mascots for moral campaigns. They are people. Real, complex, emotional people with bad days, big dreams, petty fights, inside jokes, and moments of staggering insight. Their stories matter not because they teach us something, but because they are part of our collective story, our shared fabric, woven with persistence, laughter, frustration, and that disarming warmth that makes a stranger feel like a friend. We must never again reduce a life to a diagnosis. Because the truth is, humanity isn't measured in IQ points or salaries or chromosomes. It's measured in connection, in kindness, in the audacity to keep loving a world that hasn't always loved you back. When we say every life has value, we're not doing anyone a favor. We're telling the truth. Because if any life has to prove its worth just to be protected, none of us are safe. But if we begin from a place of shared value of inherent dignity, then we build a world that's not just inclusive, but human. People with Down syndrome don't need pity. They need presence, partners, listeners, room to grow, room to stumble, room to shine. They aren't side notes in history, they are some of its most radiant chapters. So how were people with Down syndrome treated throughout history? With misunderstanding, with silence, with cruelty, but also with resilience, with resistance, with a love so strong it cracked through centuries of stone. This isn't just their story, it's ours. If this journey moved you, Follow or subscribe for more stories that center the heart of humanity. And let me know, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? I'd love to know who's out there with us tonight. Stay kind, stay curious, and never forget, being different has never meant being less. Imagine holding in your hand the first sparkle humanity ever saw: a shell, a bead, a tooth threaded through twine. Not just decoration, but declaration. Before there were gods or kings, we had jewelry. And jewelry spoke of power, spirit, love, and survival. Tonight, we're not just talking fashion. We're diving into the ancient heartbeat of human identity, where every necklace was a statement, every ring a whisper from the soul. If you love stories that shimmer with history and mystery, follow or subscribe. We've got treasures to unearth. From the frozen steppes of Siberia, where mammoth ivory bangles lay buried in permafrost, to the sun-bleached plains of Africa, where ostrich shell beads were traded like whispers between tribes, ancient peoples separated by oceans and millennia still turned again and again to ornamentation. Why? Because jewelry touches something universal. It answers the need to belong, to be seen, to turn bare skin into a canvas for belief. Before anyone wore a crown of gold, they strung a talisman of teeth or bones and stepped into ceremony not for wealth, but for meaning. That first gleam-punctured shell looped onto a fiber cord wasn't just survival. It was art. It was language. It was magic. And from that humble string, an entire universe of adornment would unfold. As early tribes settled into empires, jewelry didn't just evolve, it erupted into power. In the fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia, where writing first met clay and gods danced on ziggurats, gold became more than a metal. It became a status symbol, a vocabulary of prestige. Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian artisans shaped this golden language with meticulous precision, setting crimson carnelian, indigo lapis lazuli, and creamy agate into spiraling cuffs and divine amulets. These weren't trinkets, they were sacred technologies. A spiral meant eternity, a square meant cosmic order. And they didn't just decorate people, they adorned statues of gods, glowing with ritual intention beneath temple torchlight. Jewelry wasn't optional, it was essential. High-ranking women wore headdresses that could rival a modern chandelier, their wrists clinking with layered bracelets, their necks draped in stones buried with them to guarantee a glowing eternity. These pieces said, "I was chosen by the gods, by fate, by history." In Mesopotamia, to wear jewelry was to wear a title. Down the Nile, the Egyptians took jewelry to metaphysical heights. Gold wasn't just precious, it was divine, believed to be the very flesh of the gods. In the land of pyramids and papyrus, jewelry became both armor and oracle. Amulets weren't just fashionable, they were life insurance for the soul. Scarabs stood for rebirth. Ankhs looped eternity around the wearer's neck, and the Eye of Horus, set close to the skin, offered protection so powerful it still appears in pop culture tattoos today. Priests, pharaohs, and everyday citizens alike adorned themselves with jewelry, not just for status, but for spiritual survival. Every turquoise bead was a shield, every inlaid collar, a cosmic GPS guiding you to the afterlife. Even children wore protective trinkets. Even animals had engraved collars. Even the dead-layered toad, a crown in symbolic metals, were wrapped in jewelry like a sacred final wardrobe change. For Egypt and Mesopotamia, jewelry wasn't just style, it was infrastructure. Religious, political, and cultural meaning tangled into every shimmering loop. Jewelry marked the chosen, blessed the bearer, and immortalized the soul. Then came the Greeks and Roman civilizations that treated jewelry not just as belief, but as philosophy on gold chains. The Greeks, obsessed with balance, created pieces that hugged the body like poetry. Wreath-shaped diadems rested on brows, echoing their gods. Mythology dripped from earring to anklet, Aphrodite surfing a golden wave, Athena whispering from a ring. Gems weren't just pretty, they were prescriptions. Carnelian soothed anger. Amethyst kept your wineglass from turning you into a philosopher with no filter. The Romans, always eager to one-up, took it further. Empire meant imports. Jewelry became a global affair. pearls from the Gulf, emeralds from Egypt, sapphires from Sri Lanka. Roman noblewomen layered their wealth like lasignairings on every digit, brooches like anchors. But it wasn't just for beauty. Jewelry sealed deals, proclaimed status, and even brace yourself held secret compartments for poisons or perfumes, functional fashion, ancient style. Even children weren't spared the sparkle. They wore bully lockets stuffed with protective charms to keep evil spirits at bay. And the newly freed? Gold rings marked their new status, their wrists whispering "citizen," louder than any scroll. Jewelry in Rome and Greece wasn't vanity. It was autobiography. It announced your lineage, your loyalties, your longings. It was wearable legacy. But if the West made jewelry elegant, the East made it sacred. India, in particular, treated adornment as the skin's second soul. From the ancient Indus Valley to today's sari-draped weddings, jewelry in India has always been sacred, woven into life from birth to death. A newborn might receive gold bangles. A bride is bathed in jewelry like a blessing. And even in death, the body is adorned for spiritual departure. Gold is Lakshmi's Matalth, the goddess of abundant sand, is revered as pure, protective, and eternal. But each piece has a purpose. A mangtika on the forehead lights the third eye. Anklets echo the steps of tradition. Nose rings invoke sensuality and strength. Bangles harmonize energy. Toe rings tell the world, "I am loved, and I love." Jewelry was not gendered. Kings dripped in gemstones. Warriors wrapped sacred talismans on their arms before battle, blessed not just to protect the flesh, but the spirit. In China and Southeast Asia, jade reigned supreme, carved into dragons and phoenixes. Not for wealth, but immortality. Jade didn't decorate it, defended. Across the East, jewelry was ritual, poetry, prayer. It was woven into weddings, meditations, and moments of power. It was armor and art all at once. Then came medieval European landscape of cathedrals and castles, piety and pageantry. Here, jewelry walked the tightrope between sacred reverence and royal flex. Religion gripped the continent, and with it, jewelry transformed. Pagan charms evolved into Christian relics. Crosses hung not just from necks, but from hearts. Rosaries were prayers you could hold. Rings sealed pacts and papal decrees. Relictini, bone shards of saints or cloth fragments soaked in holy lore, were wrapped in gold like divine USB drives carrying salvation. Every stone had a sermon. The church commissioned goldsmiths to create jaw-dropping chalices, bishops' rings, and jewel-strung crosses that caught candlelight like halos. Jewelry became not just spiritual, it was political. To wear a sapphire meant divine wisdom. A ruby, holy passion. An emerald, renewal of soul and soil alike. Royal courts turned jewelry into national symbols. Crowns weren't just headgear, they were claims to thrones, often encrusted with gems that told stories. Knights wore tokens into battle pendants blessed by sweethearts or engraved with oaths. Mourning rings emerged, etched with names of the dead, worn like personal funerals wrapped in gold. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what. Pearls were reserved for the elite, brass was for the common folk. But even the peasants braided cords or carved bone trinkets to honor their lives, their loves, their saints. Their jewelry didn't gleam, but it mattered just as much. In medieval Europe, jewelry was faith on a chain, loyalty in a loop, and memory clasped tight around the wrist. It transcended wealth, it carried weight. Then the Renaissance dawned, and with it, jewelry was reborn like everything else. Suddenly, it was about art, intellect, and taste. A necklace wasn't just an accessory, it was a conversation with history. Nobles, merchants, and new dynasties commissioned jewelry like they did portraits and poems. Goldsmiths became legends in their own right, collaborating with painters and architects. Enameling exploded in popularity. Gemstones danced in symmetrical harmony, and metalwork became miniature sculpture. Renaissance jewelry was as layered as the era itself. A brooch could tell a love story. A ring might carry a secret verse. A hairnet laced with rubies could whisper your house's allegiance. These weren't just adornments, they were declarations. Jewelry had finally become what it always wanted to be, the intersection of soul, story, power, and beauty. And it all began with a bead on a string, a lock of hair, a whisper in gold, a lover's face framed in gemstones. Welcome to the Renaissance, where jewelry wasn't just worn, it was felt. Every brooch, every pendant was a diary entry in metal, coded with love, loss, desire, and dreams. Imagine Cupid lounging lazily on your collarbone, or a phoenix rising boldly from your chest. In this era, jewelry became less about God and more about you. Devotion got personal. Saints tucked into lockets, biblical stories etched inside ornate clasp. Prayer didn't need a pulpit anymore. It just needed a chain. Rosaries glimmered with coral and gold, worn as much to impress as to invoke. And the gemstone? Oh, it was having its moment. No longer just a mystical symbol, it became the star of the show. Cutting techniques got sharper, and gem hunters became the Indiana Joneses of their time, sourcing diamonds from India, emeralds from Colombia, and pearls pulled from Persian Gulf waters. These jewels weren't just set into crowns, they were traded as diplomacy, passed from monarchs to moguls like glittering secrets. Jewelry layered thick across bodices and collars, women's ensembles jingled with trinkets, pearls cascading like chandeliers from their ears. Men, not to be outshone, flaunted chunky chains of office, engraved sword hilts, and rings that could double as brass knuckles. Jewelry became a full-body biography, a dazzling blend of who you were, what you believed, and what you hoped to become. In the Renaissance, beauty wasn't skin-deep, it was hammered into gold, polished with pride, and worn like a second soul. Then, the Renaissance made way for the Baroque. And if you thought jewelry was dramatic before, buckle up. The Baroque era was extra everything. Think opera-level opulence. Think royalty using their chests as display cases. From the 1600s into the early 1700s, jewelry became performance art, not just status spectacle. And at the heart of it all, power. Imperial power. Baroque jewelry screamed one thing: I rule everything the light touches, and some stuff it doesn't. This was the age of court drama, and no one played the game better than Louis XIV in France or the Habsburg dynasty. Necklines plunged, collars soared, and every inch of skin became prime real estate for gemstone clusters, intricate pins, and dripping ornamentation. Men weren't left out. They wrapped themselves in gemstone-studded insignia and golden chains, so heavy they could moonlight as armor. Gloves sparkled, hairpins sparkled, shoes sparkled. If you weren't blinding people when you entered the room, were you even nobility? But this glittering explosion had a dark glitter to it. These weren't just jewels, they were spoils. Europe's reach stretched across the globe, and with it came the plundering of India's diamonds, Colombia's emeralds, and gold stripped from colonized lands. Jewelry became a souvenir of empire, a gilded badge of conquest. One legendary piece, the La Peregrina pearl. Fished from the coast of Panama, it graced Spanish royalty, Napoleon's brother, and eventually Elizabeth Taylor. Gorgeous, yes, but every layer of polish hid centuries of labor, loss, and cross-continental collision. Baroque jewelry wasn't polite. It was bold, sculptural, emotional. Brooches looked like miniature cathedrals. Rings were so ornate they had their own zip code. Earrings practically brushed shoulders. Designs mimicked the swirling music and scrollwork architecture of the time. Florid, layered, unapologetically over the top. Religious jewelry also escalated. Rosaries turned into divine bling, studded with diamonds. Reliquaries went portable, doubling as pendants that held saint bones behind golden doves and sculpted thorns. Jewelry in this age was sacred and scandalous. A spiritual shield one moment, a royal flex the next. Beneath all this glitter, though, tectonic shifts were happening. Colonization, trade, and the rise of the merchant class cracked open the doors of luxury. The middle class was emerging, no longer content to admire riches from afar. And while the elite used jewelry to assert dominance, the masses were slowly getting their own seat at the jeweled table. The 18th and 19th centuries were a powder keg of change. Revolutions shattered monarchies. The Industrial Revolution rewired everything from how people worked to how they dressed. And jewelry? It too underwent a transformation. What was once a language reserved for royals and clergy now began to speak for everyone. Post-French Revolution, overt luxury could get your head chopped off literally. So, fashion dialed it back. Neoclassical styles took over. Simple, refined, inspired by the ideals of ancient Rome and Greece. Think cameos, laurel wreaths, and lockets hidden beneath high collars. Jewelry nodded quietly now to reason, to equality, to inner elegance. But Queen Victoria said, "Let's talk about feelings." And with that, the 19th century was swept into the warm embrace of sentimental jewelry. Victoria's romance with Prince Albert gave rise to matching bracelets, mourning brooches, and lockets filled with weight for its actual hair. Jewelry became emotional archive, engagement rings, charm bracelets, birthstones, each gem a heartbeat, each trinket a memory. Thanks to the industrial boom, jewelry also got democratized. Mass production, electroplating, and machine-cut stones let the middle class finally shine. Enter costume jewelry. Not fake fabulous. Suddenly, anyone could wear their story on their sleeve or at least on their ring finger. Global influence spread fast. Japanese aesthetics crept into European art, especially during the Art Nouveau wave. Mughal and Persian styles dazzled the design elite. Colonization, as always, played a double role, stealing, yes, but also blending cultures. The result? Jewelry that echoed far beyond borders. By the late 1800s, the era of the big brands had arrived. Names like Tiffany, Boucheron, and Cartier rose from adelays to aristocracy. These weren't just jewelers, they were storytellers, crafting pieces that felt both eternal and of the moment. Their work shaped what we now think of as modern luxury, refined, romantic, and deeply personal. Jewelry wasn't just about flexing anymore. It was about feeling. Every piece became part of someone's timeline, marking births, binding love, mourning loss, and even defying social norms. And just over the horizon, a new century was revving its engines. A century that would not only reinvent jewelry, it would tear up the entire rulebook. The 20th century didn't just bend tradition. It shattered it, flinging shards across art, politics, and fashion. Jewelry leapt from royal courts to jazz clubs, from red carpets to city streets. It morphed from ornament to outcry, from dainty trinket to declaration. First came the angular electricity of Art Deco. Born in the roaring 1920s, it was all platinum lines, black onyx, and speed. Think Egyptian tombs meet Manhattan skyscraper. Earrings stretched long and geometric. Necklaces swung low with flapper fringe, and cufflinks became sleek industrial statements. Jewelry was streamlined, rebellion sleek, fast, and fiercely modern. World wars slowed the sparkle, but the post-war boom brought it back with vengeance. The 1950s? Pure Hollywood. Think Marilyn Monroe whispering sweet nothings about diamonds being a girl's best friend. Audrey Hepburn sipping coffee in pearls. Luxury houses like Harry Winston and Van Cleef fused royalty with movie star mystique. Then came the 1960s and 70s, and jewelry broke loose. The counterculture gave rise to handmade pieces, nature symbols, beads, leather, and turquoise. It wasn't about sparkly, it was about soul. It was spirituality strung around your neck, rebellion looped through your ears. Then disco crashed the party, ushering in gold chains the size of serpents, gemstone bling, and earrings you could probably eat dinner off. But here's where it got revolutionary. Jewelry started saying, "This is me." Not just rich me, not just married me, identity me. Pride pins, zodiac charms, nameplate necklaces, political brooches. Jewelry became language, culture, flag, protest, celebration. It told stories louder than gold ever could. Where you came from, who you love, what you believe. And in recent years, that conversation only got louder. Today, jewelry no longer just whispers your story, it shouts it across continents. It might gleam on a wedding finger, sparkle in a viral TikTok, or hang from the neck of someone protesting injustice. In this modern era, it's not just about what shines, it's about why. Welcome to the age where a tiny pendant can outspeak a royal crown and, sometimes, outlast it. The rise of sustainability has disrupted everything we thought we knew about value. Lab-grown diamonds, once dismissed as artificial, now challenge the centuries-old obsession with mining. Why dig into the earth when you can create brilliance with science and ethics combined? Suddenly, a flawless stone doesn't need a history of conflict to shine. Meanwhile, heirloom redesigns are giving dusty trinkets a second life. Grandma's brooch? It's now a bold statement earring. That Victorian ring? Melted down and reborn as a modern symbol of love, identity, or rebellion. Artisan revival movements are pushing back against mass production with a vengeance. Across the globe, jewelers are returning to root-honoring indigenous craftsmanship, ancient methods, and regional storytelling. It's not just about selling sparklights, about preserving culture and community, bead by bead, hammer strike by hammer strike. Digital culture has also reshaped how we adorn. A ring today can go viral before it goes on your finger. Social media has become the new marketplace, gallery, and museum. Jewelry isn't confined to boutiques or runways. It thrives in Instagram reels, TikTok hauls, and Etsy shops. A piece might be handcrafted by a single mother in Oaxaca or a queer metalsmith in Brooklyn. It might symbolize a political cause, a spiritual path, or simply the confidence to walk through the world louder than ever. Jewelry has transcended the material, no longer chained to diamonds or gold. It dances with every texture and story imaginable. Wood, bone, acrylic, recycled plasticevery material now has a seat at the aesthetic table. And yet, no matter how it evolves, one truth remains. Jewelry speaks. It always has. From the protective amulets of ancient Mesopotamia to the bold rings of the digital age, it's our most intimate declaration. As long as we desire to be seen, felt, remembered, jewelry will endure. Now, let's shift from the glow of gold to the shadow of myth, from sparkle to smoke. Off the southern coast of Italy, not far from the noise and neon of modern Naples, lies a forgotten jewel of an entirely different kind. Baia. Most maps mark it quietly. Most history books skip its name. But beneath its crumbling ruins and half-sunken villas rests something haunting, a stone chamber carved deep into volcanic earth, cloaked in mist and myth. Some say it's not a ruin at all, but a portal. A real one. Baia wasn't built for empires. It was built for escape. It was the Roman elite's paradisia playground of wine, scandal, steam, and whispered prophecy. Nestled on the Bay of Naples and simmering atop the restless breath of the Campi Flegrei supervolcano, Baia was as close as the Roman world came to fantasy. The ground here smokes. The water boils without flame. The air hisses with sulfur and mystery. This land doesn't sit still, it seethes. For emperors like Nero and Hadrian, this wasn't a retreat, it was a realm. Lavish villas spilled down cliffs into private harbors. Marble statues of gods stared into the sun. Steam baths laced the hillsides. Poets called it heaven. Moralists called it hell. One wrote that Baia was where morals came to drown in wine and desire. But even paradise cannot outrun geology. Over centuries, volcanic shifts pushed the land slowly downward. Entire courtyards, temples, and mosaic-floored palaces vanished beneath the sea. Today, divers glide over silent streets, past headless sculptures and forgotten gods, swimming through what was once the most decadent city in the empire. And yet, among these drowned marvels lies one structure unlike any other. Hidden near the old thermal baths, a narrow passageway burrows into volcanic stone. At first glance, it seems like a maintenance tunnel. But descend, and the temperature drops. The air thickens. Sulfur curls up from unseen cracks. You begin to sweat. You begin to wonder. This is no aqueduct. This is a path into something else. Mid-20th century, a British engineer, not a celebrity archaeologist or robed mystic, but a civil engineer named Robert Paget, decided to investigate. Along with colleague Keith Jones and a team of volunteers, he spent years crawling through volcanic rock, guided by gut instinct and obscure Latin texts. What they found was astonishing. The tunnel twisted sharply, clearly man-made, clearly intentional. It dropped lower, then rose again. It bent in ways aqueducts never do, Eventually, they reached a chamber partially flooded, saturated with heat and the acrid smell of sulfur. Steam blurred their vision. A pool shimmered darkly at their feet. The rock whispered, as if remembering. Paget believed he'd found the antrim, not just any Cavatha cave, the oracle tomb, the mythic entrance to the underworld. Ancient Roman writers like Virgil had described it in chilling detail, a suffocating passage near Lake Avernus, where a priestess of Apollo, the Sibyl, would inhale volcanic fumes and speak with the dead. The way this tunnel was built, the way it mirrored that mythology down to the angles, the smells, the structure rate defied coincidence. The oracle tomb wasn't a burial chamber, it was a descent, a ritual path, a carefully engineered journey into the divine or the damned. Initiates may have sat on those stone benches, breathing the gas, waiting for visions. What happened in that chamber? Prophecy? Madness? Exorcism? All Paget knew was this. It felt like myth made real. Academic circles mostly shrugged. It was too weird, too spiritual, too mythological. But the tunnel remains. You can still walk it. You can still feel the air shift. The shadows close in. The oracle tomb doesn't demand belief. It only demands presence. To truly understand this strange place, we must return to the heart of Roman belief, to the shores of Lake Avernus, and to the terrifying voice that once echoed from volcanic caves. That voice belonged to the Cumaean Sibyl. The Sibyl was more than a prophetess. She was an institution, said to dwell near a lake so cursed birds fell from the sky. She sat at the threshold of Hades. She inhaled the earth's breath, spoke with gods, and whispered futures no man wanted to hear. Her cave wasn't symbolic. It was physical, a place of steam and silence, where fate was pulled from the ground like smoke from a wound. Roman generals consulted her. Emperors feared her. Virgil's Aeneid paints a vivid picture. The hero Aeneas, guided by the Sibyl, descends through a stinking cavern into the underworld, facing visions that test his soul. That cave, long dismissed as fiction, now had a contender in the oracle tomb of Baia. Was it the same place? No one can say for certain, but everything aligns: the architecture, the location, the sulfuric breath of the earth. It might be myth. It might be memory. It might be both. What matters is this: the oracle tomb exists. It's not a metaphor. It's carved, stone by stone, into volcanic earth. And it's waiting, always waiting. What if a tunnel could take you not to another place, but to another reality? What if a cave was more than stone? What if it was a question cut from the bones of the earth, still waiting for an answer? In the hills of Baia, under layers of volcanic ash and Roman ruin, one such passage still breathes, and no one who walks through it comes back unchanged. Robert Paget's discovery in the sunken shadows of Baia offered more than an archaeological curiosity, offered a challenge to the modern world's notion of myth and memory. The narrow structure he uncovered, now known as the oracle tomb, seems to echo with every line of ancient literature. Virgil, in his epic The Aeneid, painted a chilling picture of a passage so hot with the breath of the earth that even heroes hesitated to enter. He wrote of a tunnel where suffocating vapors choked the senses, where dripping water whispered in the dark, and where silence itself seemed haunted. Paget's find? It matches these descriptions not in spirit but in structure, scale, and sensation. Those who've descended its sloping corridor speak of immediate unease, the way the heat clings to your skin, the way the air turns chemical and sour, the way sound seems swallowed by the stone. The final chamber, where water fills the floor and light plays tricks on reflection, feels less like architecture and more like conjuring. Is it where the Sibyl once breathed her riddles into the dark, or a Roman tribute built in reverence to legend? Either way, the space serves a singular, spine-tingling purpose. It makes myth physical. It is descent by design. Paget and his team, during their meticulous exploration in the 1960s, realized this was no abandoned bathhouse or utilitarian passage. It was deliberate, calculated. Every bend, every descent, every change in temperature had meaning. It was a spiritual gauntlet hidden in plain rock. The path begins wide and gently lit, easing the traveler into the illusion of control. But then it turns sharply, narrows, darkens, heats, Benches carved into stone suggest moments of reflection, prayer, or preparation. As one goes deeper, the air thickens, condensation slicks the walls, and volcanic breath stings the lungs. The journey ends in a descent into water. A hidden staircase, invisible until you're nearly upon it, leads into a pool so dark and still it appears bottomless. In Roman myth, this was the Styx, the boundary river between the living and the dead. The torchlight of ancient visitors would have flickered across steam, creating shifting illusions. It wasn't just eerie, it was theater. A performance of transition from mortal to initiate, from question to epiphany. Pilgrims came not to gawk, but to transform. This wasn't sightseeing, it was sacred performance. The fire, water, and stone weren't backdrop. They were active agents in the ritual. In stepping through the tunnel, the visitor symbolically and perhaps psychologically crossed over. Some would seek prophecy, others closure. And when they emerged, squinting into daylight, the world might look the same, but they were not. At just over 400 feet, the passage is not grand, but what it lacks in size, it delivers in impact. Its psychological depth far outpaces its physical one. Padet and his team realized early on, this structure was a device, not for travel, but for transformation. From the first gentle slope to the final submerged silence, everything is purposeful. It's myth engineering, ritual technology. The layout tells a story. A slow descent into darkness, a turn that cuts off the light, a shaft where volcanic gases rise, a narrowing path that forces the visitor to crouch, to yield. Then, suddenly, a chamber sealed in darkness and water. Some believe a hidden alcove allowed a priestess to speak unseen, her voice warped by stone and steam into something otherworldly. Whether performance or presence, it was felt. The tunnel may have had no mosaics, no marble, no imperial inscriptions, but what it created emotionally, spiritually, was a masterpiece of altered perception. Like the pyramids or the ziggurats, it wasn't about impressing the eye. It was about cracking open the soul. To understand the oracle tomb is to straddle the line between history and allegory, between reality and the stories ancient people told to explain it. The Cumaean Sibyl, whose name is etched into Roman memory, wasn't just a mythical figure. She was recorded, revered, and feared. According to legend, she was granted 1,000 years of life by the god Apollo, but not eternal youth. Her body withered while her voice endured, a voice from the dark, a whisper from the earth's breath. Virgil didn't just write about her, he honored her. In the Aeneid, Aeneas is guided by the Sibyl into the underworld. The setting? Lake Avernusjust, a short walk from Baia. The environment Virgil describes matches Padet's tunnel too perfectly to ignore. The sulfurous air, the silence, the plunge into darkness. Could the chamber Padet found have inspired the legend? Or did the legend inspire the chamber? Some historians shrug, others lean closer. The truth may lie somewhere in between. For the Romans, myth wasn't symbolistic, it was embodied. A temple didn't point to a god, it contained one. A cave wasn't metaphor, it was mouth. The oracle tomb, in this context, isn't fantasy, it's function. It did what it was built to do, bring mortals face to face with mystery. Despite their exhaustive documentation, Padet and Jones were met with indifference. Their discovery didn't look like Pompeii. It didn't conform. It had no mosaics to Instagram. But what it lacked in decoration, it made up for in precision. Temperature shifts, acoustic distortions, engineered angle saw evidence of intention, not accident, not chance. In the decades since, modern tech has reawakened interest. Ground-penetrating radar, underwater mapping, and 3D scanning have begun peeling back Baia's secrets. Forgotten courtyards, intact mosaics, and the tunnel still there, still breathing. The oracle tomb, once dismissed, is being reconsidered not as fantasy but as functional spirituality. Because in the end, what matters is not whether it was literally the gateway to Hades. What matters is that it felt like it, that it worked, that it moved people, that it changed them, that it still can. Like all great rituals, the oracle tomb doesn't give answers. It asks questions. It opens you. And in that moment of opening, something ancient slips through. Something vast. Something sacred. And still, it waits. So, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because not every portal is locked, and not every myth is lost. She wasn't born into fame, she was born into chaos. But Simone Biles didn't just rise out of adversity, she flipped over it. Pain was never her obstacle, it became her momentum. Before the medals, before the lights, she was already defying gravity, rewriting what survival could look like with every leap. Simone's journey wasn't fate, it was fire. A perfect storm of talent, grit, and relentless will. After that fateful daycare trip that introduced her to gymnastics, she began training at Bannon's Gymnastics in Houston. It didn't take long for coaches to realize they weren't just watching promise, they were watching history being written. She had raw power, uncanny spatial awareness, and something far rarer, joy in the face of challenge. By 8, she was executing skills girls years older wouldn't dare. Her height, eventually just 4'8", became a weapon. She could twist faster, flip higher, and land harder than anyone else in the room. But none of it was handed to her. Simone was forged in repetition. Her coaches pushed, and she pushed back harder. Central to her early rise was Coach Amy Borman, who didn't just build Simone's rowdiness, built her confidence. Their bond was one of mutual belief, trust layered with respect. Unlike many elite training regimens, Simone's was different. Her family and coaches insisted she remain a kid while chasing greatness. She was homeschooled for flexibility, but her life wasn't swallowed by the gym. She still laughed with her siblings, ate pizza, and did flips in the backyard, because it made her happy, not because it was training. By 14, Simone was already disrupting the junior elite circuit with high-risk, high-reward routines. She wasn't just performing gymnastics, she was reshaping it. Her power was unmatched, her skills almost alien in difficulty, but her real edge was internal. Simone moved with quiet certainty. She didn't seek the spotlight, it followed her. By 2013, she wasn't the future anymore, she was the present. That year, at just 16, she stormed into the senior elite level and stunned the world at the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships in Antwerp. She took 2 gold medals, including the coveted all-around title, immediately cementing her as the best gymnast alive. But it wasn't just about winning, it was how she won. Simone's routines bent physics. Her landings were steel. Her presence was electric. And people began to realize this wasn't just a rising star. This was an entirely new force in the sport. From 2013 to 2016, Simone dominated like no gymnast before her. 3 straight world all-around titles. An arsenal of skills no one else attempted. Scores that made even the best look second tier. She didn't just beat her competition, she obliterated expectations. But what truly made her extraordinary wasn't just her physical difficulty, it was her presence. Her joy. She moved with a kind of gravity-defying freedom, dancing between skills as if the air was hers alone. Simone redefined what women's gymnastics could be. No longer about delicate artistry alone, it became about unapologetic strength, brilliance, and authenticity. She didn't fit the mold. She broke-eyed and then reassembled it around herself. By the time the Rio Olympics arrived in 2016, the world wasn't asking if she would win. They were asking how much. In Rio, Simone didn't just competition conquered. She won 4 gold medals and a bronze, the most by an American gymnast in over 3 decades. Her vaults looked like gravity had called in sick. Her floor routine featured the Biles, a tumbling pass so brutal the scoring system struggled to measure it. She landed like thunder and smiled like sunshine. Commentators stopped comparing her to other gymnasts, they started comparing her to herself. Yet, behind the stardom, Simone stayed grounded. She laughed with teammates, gave credit to her coaches and parents, and never stopped being that girl who loved flipping in the backyard. She wasn't just changing the sport, she was changing how athletes, especially women of color, were seen. She became the first black woman to win the Olympic all-around title for the U.S., and she did it her way, loud, proud, and smiling. But after Rio, Simone returned not just as a champion but as a phenomenon. The appearances, the interviews, the book deals, the television cameos, it was a whirlwind. She danced on national television, released her memoir Courage to Soar, and became a global symbol of excellence. Yet in all the applause, a quiet question began to grow. Who was Simone outside gymnastics? Off the mat, away from expectation? The pressure didn't vanish, it evolved. Now, perfection was expected. Anything less was questioned. Still, in 2018, Simone returned with fire. At nationals, she competed through broken toes and a kidney stone and still won. But underneath the gold was a deeper battle. The joy hadn't left, but something heavier had arrived. Then came the truth. In 2018, Simone spoke words that shook the world. She revealed that she, too, was one of the many gymnasts abused by Larry Nassar's predator, who hid behind a medical license for decades. Her confession wasn't just brave, it was revolutionary. As the face of USA Gymnastics, Simone's voice carried power. She didn't just call out Nassar, she called out the system that protected him. Her words, "I am not afraid to tell my story anymore," weren't just healing for herself. They became a rallying cry for survivors everywhere. Her testimony before Congress in 2021, composed and emotional, wasn't an athlete's speech. It was a reckoning. Even as she trained, competed, and won, Simone was carrying the brokenness of an entire sport on her back. And still, she soared. But her greatest moment of strength came not in a medal-winning performance but in Tokyo, in choosing to step back. When Simone withdrew mid-competition in the 2021 Olympics, citing a mental block known as the twisties, many didn't understand. But gymnasts knew. Athletes knew. The twisties aren't just scary, they're dangerous. For Simone, it was life or death. And in choosing her safety over expectation, she taught the world a lesson, that protecting your mental health isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She returned days later for the beam final and won bronze. But the real win was already hers. She had redefined courage. She stood in front of the world and said, "Not today," and still showed up for her teammates, still smiled, still led. After Tokyo, many wondered if she would return. But Simone wasn't done enough with the sport and not with her story. She stepped back to heal. She went to therapy. She gave speeches. And in 2023, she walked back into competition not to prove anything, but because she wanted to. And once again, she owned it. At the 2023 U.S. Championships, Simone debuted new routines, performed the Yurchenko double pike vaultone of the hardest moves ever attempted, and dominated with more power and control than ever. But this Simone was different, softer, smiling more, competing on her terms. Off the mat, she married NFL safety Jonathan Owens, shared her joys and struggles, balanced elite sport with being human. Simone Biles isn't just the most decorated gymnast in history. She's a cultural revolution in motion. She changed how we define greatness not by how much she won, but by what she chose to protect. Her voice, her joy, her truth. She reimagined gymnastics. She made it stronger, bolder, and more beautiful. She reminded us that being the GOAT isn't just about records, it's about legacy. It's about leaving the world better, kinder, braver. Simone's story is still unfolding, but already she's shown us something far more valuable than gold. She's shown us what it means to fly, fall, and choose to rise again. If her journey moved you, subscribe for more stories that honor the strength behind the spotlight.